The morning she signed her name to a man she'd never spoken to. Her father was sitting outside the lawyer's office with his hat in his hands, not looking at her. That was the part she kept coming back to later. Not the paper, not the ring, not even the wagon ride out to a ranch she'd never seen. It was the way Leonard Pryor couldn't look at his own daughter while she handed her life over to pay for his mistakes. Her name was June Pryor. She was 24 years old, and she had spent most of those years believing that love, real love, was something you chose. Something you walked toward with your eyes open. She had been wrong about a lot of things. It started with the mill. Her father had borrowed against it 3 years before, when the drought hit and the orders stopped coming, and he'd convinced himself the rains were 2 months away at most. They weren't. The debt went to Cutter Boone, land broker, creditor, a man whose name showed up on half the land deeds in Harlan County before people understood what kind of deals he wrote. By the time June understood the full shape of what her father had done, the interest had doubled, and the mill was already signed over as collateral. What her father hadn't told her was that there was a second debt, smaller but older, owed to a man named Soren Vane. Soren Vane owned 1,200 acres of cattle land west of town, a house big enough for 3 families, and a reputation that ran ahead of him like a cold wind. People said he was severe. They said he didn't talk much, didn't socialize, didn't come into town except for supplies and business. The widow Casper, who had lived next to the Pryor property for 20 years, said he'd had a wife once and that the marriage had ended badly, though nobody could agree on exactly how. Some people said she left, some people said she died. Some people said both were true in different ways. June had seen him twice in her life. Once at the grain exchange when she was 16, a tall man in a dark coat who signed papers without speaking to the clerk. Once outside the post office 2 winters ago, loading boxes into a wagon alone in the rain, because apparently that was the kind of man he was. She had not thought much about him either time. She was thinking about him now. The lawyer, a thin man named Prudhomme, who smelled pipe tobacco and old paper, laid the document on the table and explained it in the flat voice of a man who'd done this before and had stopped feeling anything about it. The debt was $412, with interest $480. Leonard Pryor had no assets remaining that weren't already claimed. There was, however, an arrangement that Mr. Vane was prepared to offer. The debt would be forgiven in full. The mill, what was left of it, would be returned to the Pryor name. In exchange, June would marry him. Eatriz would be legal and binding. She would live on the Vane property. Prudhomme set down his pen and looked at her over his spectacles. "He's made clear it's a choice," he said. "Not a condition. You can walk out of this office and he won't pursue the debt through the courts. But if he does, Mr. Pryor, you should understand what a judgment would mean." Her father still had his hat in his hands. June looked at the paper for a long time. Then she looked at her father. Then she picked up the pen. "Where do I sign?" she said. It wasn't a question. She didn't cry on the ride out. She had cried the night before, alone in her room with her face pressed into her pillow so her younger brother Teddy wouldn't hear through the wall. By morning there was nothing left. She sat in the wagon beside a man she didn't know, on a road she'd never traveled, and watched the town she'd grown up in get smaller and then disappear. Soren Vane didn't try to make conversation. He drove with both hands on the reins, his eyes on the road, and he didn't look at her except once, when they turned off the main track and the wagon hit a rut that jolted her sideways. He reached out with one hand to steady her. Instinct, not intention, and then pulled it back just as fast when she'd righted herself. "Sorry," he said. The first word he'd spoken to her directly. She didn't answer. The house was larger than she'd expected and quieter. A housekeeper named Rosalind, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and the expression of someone who'd seen plenty and commented on none of it, showed June to a room at the end of the upstairs hall. It had a window that faced east, a quilt that looked hand-stitched, and a small writing desk with a candle on it. "Dinner is at 6, Rosalind said. "Mr. Vane eats early." "All right," June said. Rosalind paused at the door. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition. "There's a latch on the inside," she said, and left. June stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Then she crossed to the door and looked at the latch. It was new. The wood around it was fresh, lighter than the rest of the door frame. He'd had it installed, recently. For her. She didn't know what to do with that. The first week was the hardest because she didn't know the rules. Not the rules he'd made. He hadn't made any that she could see. He didn't tell her where she could and couldn't go. He didn't ask her to account for her time. He didn't come into rooms she was in unless he knocked first, and twice he knocked and then didn't enter at all when she didn't answer, just left whatever he'd been carrying outside the door, a book the second time. She hadn't asked for it. She left it on the floor for a day before she picked it up. The rules she didn't know were the ones she'd invented for herself out of fear. Don't seem comfortable. Don't let him think you've accepted this. Don't give him anything he can use to believe this is something other than what it is. She ate dinner across the table from him every evening and watched him the way you watch a man you're trying to figure out before he figures you out first. He was quiet. Not the quiet of someone withholding, she eventually understood, but the quiet of someone who simply didn't fill space with noise because he didn't see the point. He worked from before dawn until dinner. He came in clean, which she hadn't expected, washed hands, changed shirt like he'd decided before she arrived that dinner was something worth making an effort for. He asked her things, sometimes, not personal things, whether she'd grown up in town or outside it, whether the room was warm enough, whether she'd had occasion to ride. She answered in the fewest words that would pass for polite. He accepted it. That was the other thing she hadn't expected. That he would accept whatever she gave him without pushing for more. She had braced herself for pressure, for the slow work of a man trying to make her feel grateful or obligated or guilty. She had been on guard for it so long that when it didn't come, she almost didn't trust the absence of it. Almost. What actually happened? Slowly, in the way that seasons change, not in a day but over many days until you look up and something is different, was that she started to see him, not as a man who had bought something. As a man who had, apparently, made some private decision about how this was going to go and was following it without needing her to acknowledge it. The decision seemed to be, she was a person, not a transaction, and he was going to behave accordingly even if she didn't believe it yet. The hands on the property knew the situation in the vague way that people in small communities always know things. June could feel it in the way they nodded to her, careful and respectful, when she walked out to the fence line in the mornings. Not curious looks, or at least not openly. A man named Dunbar, the oldest of the hands, touched his hat brim to her and said, "Morning, Mrs. Vane," as if that was the most natural thing in the world. And she had stopped walking for half a second before she caught herself. Mrs. Vane. She hadn't thought about the name. She'd thought about the paper and the ring and the deed to the mill and the look on her father's face, but she hadn't thought about the name. She was still standing there when Soren came around the corner of the barn. He looked at her. "You all right?" "Fine," she said. "Dunbar called me Mrs. Vane. That's your name now," he said. "Matter of fact, not unkind." "I know," she said. She stopped. "You just weren't used to it yet," he said. She looked at him. "Yes." He nodded, like that made sense, and went on past her into the barn. She stood there another moment. Then she went on with her walk. She started helping Rosalind in the second week, because she couldn't stand being idle, and there was no other way to make herself useful. Rosalind accepted the help without fuss and without the kind of determined cheerfulness that would have driven June away. They worked side by side, and Rosalind told her things about the property, which suppliers were reliable, which weren't, how the smokehouse had flooded 2 winters ago and what Soren had done to fix the drainage, in the practical tone of someone handing over information a person would need. June understood she was being told things on purpose. She didn't comment on it, she listened. She started to understand the shape of the place. The ranch ran lean, not because Soren was struggling, but because he didn't believe in waste. There were no decorations except the things that had always been there. No hired men except those he'd known a long time. The account books which Rosalind showed her without being asked were clean and clear, and the handwriting was careful. He was a man who paid attention to things. She also started to understand that the other hands, and the families of the ones with families, living in the small houses on the outer parcels, treated him with a specific kind of respect that wasn't just employment. The kind that means a man has done right by you enough times that you'd do the same back. A ranch hand named Cobb mentioned, without preamble, and then moved on quickly, that Soren had covered the medical bill when Cobb's wife had been sick the winter before. He said it the way you mention something that is just true, not to make a point, and June filed it away without knowing yet what she was going to do with it. The trouble came in the 4th week, when a man named Birch Calloway rode out from town. June was in the kitchen when she heard the horse, and through the window she saw Soren go out to meet him. Calloway was a banker, or had been before the county bank reorganized under new management 2 years ago. He had a hand in several local land operations now, the kind of arrangements that were legal on paper and didn't quite smell right in practice. June had heard his name connected to Cutter Boone's, which told her most of what she needed to know. She couldn't hear what was said. She watched Soren's posture, still, arms at his sides, the particular stillness of a man who is being very controlled about something he has a strong feeling about. Calloway did most of the talking. He had papers with him which he held out. Soren looked at them without taking them. After a few minutes, Calloway left. He didn't look pleased. Soren came back inside. He went to the desk in the front room without explaining anything. June brought him a cup of coffee and set it on the corner of the desk without saying anything either. He looked up. She raised an eyebrow. Calloway thinks he has a legal claim to the North Pasture, Soren said. He doesn't, but he's going to make a case anyway. Can he win? Not if the original survey record holds up. It's in the county files. My lawyer's already seen it. He paused. It's going to take time, though, and it's going to be talked about. She understood what he was telling her without him spelling it out. People would talk. People would look for cracks to press on, including, probably, the marriage. She sat down across from him. What do you need from me? He looked at her steadily. Nothing you're not comfortable with. That isn't what I asked. Sit down, Tim. I need people to believe this is real. That this is a household. Not, he stopped, looked for the word, not a transaction. It is a transaction, she said. I know what it started as, he said. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise to yourself. I'm asking you to, he paused again. Stand beside me in it, if you're willing. June looked at him for a moment, at the careful way he'd said that. Willing. Like it was still a choice, like after 4 weeks in his house, eating at his table, sleeping under his roof, she still had the option to say no, and he would respect it. All right, she said. Then I will. The hearing at the county office was 3 weeks later. What surprised June, what she hadn't been prepared for, was that she had things to say. Not just the things she'd planned to say in support of Soren's claim, but things she knew because she'd been paying attention. The account books, the supplier records, the survey history that Rosalind had shown her, not because anyone told her she'd need it, but because she'd been learning the shape of the place, and this was part of the shape. The county clerk, a cautious man named Halverson, asked her how she came to be familiar with the property records. I live there, she said. I manage the household accounts. She did not look at Soren while she said it, but she felt him look at her. Calloway's lawyer tried twice to suggest that the marriage was unusual, the circumstances questionable, the wife not a reliable source. Judge Almeida, a woman in her 50s who had the look of someone not easily impressed, let him speak and then set down her pen with the flat, deliberate click of someone who'd made up her mind. The survey record is clear, she said. The North Pasture boundary was established in 1887 and has not been legally contested in that time. Mr. Calloway's claim is dismissed. Calloway said something to his lawyer. His lawyer said something back. Neither of them sounded happy. June and Soren walked out of the building side by side and stood on the steps for a moment in the afternoon light. You knew about the survey history, he said. Rosalind showed me the files, she said. I didn't know I'd need them, but you kept them in your head anyway. I pay attention to things, she said. It's a habit. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I've noticed. She didn't say anything. June. It was the first time he'd used her name directly. She'd been Mrs. Vane, or nothing, since she arrived. What you did in there, that wasn't nothing. I want you to know I understand what it cost. It didn't cost me anything, she said. I told the truth about something I knew. That's not what I mean. He was looking out at the street, not at her. I mean that you could have come in there and given exactly what was required and no more, and instead you. He stopped. She waited. You acted like it was yours to defend, he said. The property, the household. He paused. I don't take that lightly. She looked at him from the side. At the line of his jaw, the careful set of his shoulders, the way he said difficult things in plain word, because apparently that was the only way he knew how to say them. It is mine, she said. Isn't it? By law. By law, he said. Yes. Then I was defending what's mine. She paused. And yours. He turned to look at her then. She held his gaze. Something shifted between them, not dramatically. No sweep of music, no moment where the world rearranged itself into a different shape. More like a door that had been slightly ajar, swinging a few inches further open. Not all the way, but further. We should head back, she said. Rosalind will have dinner. Yes, he said. All right. They walked to the wagon. He did not take her hand. She did not offer it. But when he reached it first and turned back to see if she was coming, His expression was not the careful neutral she'd learned to read over the past weeks. She didn't have a word for what it was. She filed it away to look at later. The first time she laughed with him, she was embarrassed by it, not by the laugh itself, but by how easy it was. They were on the porch after dinner, 2 weeks after the hearing, and he'd said something about a particular bull, wry and understated, the kind of dry observation she'd started to recognize as his version of humor. And she'd laughed before she meant to, the real kind, and then felt strangely exposed by it. He hadn't made anything of it. He'd just looked at her with something like quiet satisfaction and gone back to his coffee. That was the thing about Soren Vane, that she was slowly having to put aside everything she'd assumed to understand. He didn't collect her. He didn't take moments that belonged to her and hold them up to examine. He let things be what they were. She started to stop bracing herself. Not all at once. She wasn't built that way, and she'd learned caution, the way you learn it, by needing it. But she started, gradually, to occupy the house differently, to walk through rooms without measuring her footsteps, to say things at dinner that were her actual thoughts and not just the minimum required by politeness, to knock on the door of his study when she had a question about the accounts, and to stay for half an hour sometimes, talking, because the conversation was one worth having. She didn't name it. Naming it would have made it too large to carry quietly. Her father came out in late October with her brother Teddy, who was 12 and had never been on a property this size, and couldn't keep the awe off his face when he saw the cattle operation. Soren took Teddy to see the horses without being asked, and June stood on the porch beside her father and watched them go. Her father was quiet for a long time. "I know what you think of me," he said eventually. "I don't think this is the time, Father. I'm trying to." He stopped, started again. "Is he good to you?" June watched Soren show Teddy how to hold out his hand to the bay mare. Teddy said something. Soren said something back. Teddy laughed. "Yes," she said. "He is." Her father exhaled. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something more complicated than that. I didn't see another." "I know," she said. "I know you didn't." She didn't say that it was all right. It wasn't all right, not entirely, and she suspected it would take longer to become all right than either of them had standing on this porch. But she also knew that standing in this yard on an autumn afternoon, watching her little brother be shown something wonderful by a man she was starting to understand, was not the place she'd expected to land when she'd signed her name in Prudhomme's office. She wasn't sure what she'd expected. Something harder, something darker. Not this. The conversation that changed things happened because of a fence. A section of fence on the northeast edge of the property had come down in the wind, and 3 cattle had gotten out, and Soren had been out since before dawn fixing it, and by the time he came in at noon, he'd been gone long enough that June had started, without deciding to watch for him. She hadn't let herself look at that too closely. She brought coffee out to the barn where he was washing up at the pump, and he took it and said thank you, and she sat on the fence and watched him drink it. "I've been thinking about the spring planting schedule," she said. He looked at her over the mug. "Have you? The south field is resting this season. You could put clover in it. It'd rebuild the soil by fall." "I know," he said. "I was already thinking it." "Then why haven't you done it?" "Because I've been doing 10 other things." He set down the mug. "Why are you thinking about the south field?" "Because it's my field too," she said. He was quiet. "Isn't it?" she said. Not quite a question. He turned to look at her fully. "Yes," he said. "It is." "Then I'm going to have opinions about it," she said. "That's going to be a feature of this arrangement, not a problem." Something moved across his face that she recognized now, the expression she hadn't had a word for on the courthouse steps. She had a word for it now. It was something like relief, the specific relief of a man who has been waiting to find out whether he is alone in something, and just found out he isn't. "June," he said. "Don't make it strange," she said. "I'm not making it strange," he said. "I'm trying to tell you something." She waited. When this arrangement was made, I knew what it was. I wasn't pretending otherwise. He was choosing his words with unusual care, even for him. I told myself that if you were comfortable, if you were safe, if you had what you needed, that was sufficient, that I had no right to want more than that from you. She didn't say anything. "I was wrong about the last part," he said. "Not about the rest. But I was wrong to think wanting more made it mine to take." She looked at him. "It doesn't," she said. "Make it yours to take, but it could be mine to give, if I decided to." He met her eyes. "Have you decided?" She thought about Prudhomme's office and the pen in her hand and her father looking away. She thought about the latch on the inside of her door, the book left outside it, the way he said Mrs. Vane and the way Dunbar said it, and the difference between those two things. The Southfield and the account books and the hearing room, and Teddy laughing at the fence with the bay mare. She thought about the way she'd stopped bracing herself, the moment that had happened and she hadn't noticed until it was already done. "I think I decided a while ago," she said. "I just wasn't ready to say it out loud." He was quiet for a moment then. "What changed?" She considered this. "You didn't try to make me grateful," she said. "Everyone I was afraid of in my life, everyone who held something over me, they always wanted me to feel it, to show it. You never asked for that." She paused. "You just left space, and I filled it with myself. And then one day I looked up and this was mine. The house and the field and the—" She stopped. "You?" He didn't say anything for a long moment. He stopped. Started again. "I'm not a man who is easy to know." "I know," she said. "I've known you for 5 months, I know that. And I know you anyway," she said. "That's the whole point." He looked at her. The autumn light was coming through the barn door and the coffee was going cold, and somewhere behind them one of the cattle was making a noise about something. It was not a romantic moment by anyone's definition of the word. It was just two people in a barn in the middle of an ordinary day arriving at something true. He reached out and took her hand. Not urgently, just placed his hand around hers. Like a question he already knew the answer to but was asking properly anyway. She let him hold it. "The clover in the south field," she said. "What about it? I'll order the seed this week." "All right," he said, "and I want to redo the account system. The current one works, but it's not efficient." "All right, and I think we should invite Cobb and his wife for dinner. She's been ill and I think she'd appreciate it." He was looking at her with the quiet expression she'd started to love, the one that meant he was listening and finding something he hadn't expected. "June," he said. "What? You can stop listing tasks." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I'm nervous." "I know," he said. "So am I." She laughed. He smiled. The rare one, the full one, the one she'd only seen a handful of times in 5 months. She was going to see it more. She knew that now. "Okay," she said. "Then we're both nervous." "We're both nervous," he agreed. They stood there in the barn with the cold coffee and the cattle sounds and the autumn coming through the door, holding hands, and June Pryor. June Vane looked at the shape of the life she'd been afraid of and thought about how different fear looks when you're standing inside the thing you were afraid of. And it has turned out to be something else entirely. Not what she'd chosen at the beginning, but hers, by the end, in every way that counted. Hers, and chosen.